Hey everyone, welcome back. Today let's take a look at what an ISA is and what am I invested in currently and how do I invest? What applications do I use? So for one, I use an ISA. What's an ISA? Now if you're from the UK, you're probably already familiar with an ISA. A stocks and shares ISA is basically an investment account for stocks and shares that you can invest in up to £20,000 and any capital gains, it's tax-free. Now in saying this 20,000, it also has a limit. So every new tax year in the UK, this 20,000 is reset, which means that I will receive a new £20,000 allowance. So for the 2024 tax year, I can invest an additional £20,000 and all my capital gains is tax-free. Now this is really amazing because not every country provides this. In the UK, it's also possible to get ISA savings account with your bank. I personally prefer the stocks and shares account because I can invest passively. I can invest very moderately. I don't have to invest thousands of pounds simply because I don't have thousands of pounds to invest. But what if you're like me and you want to invest £10, £50, £100? You simply want to learn about the market. Maybe you want to explore and experiment and try things, see how it will be. You might be familiar with a lot of companies who you can actually invest in. Apple, you can buy their shares. And when you buy a share, you get a certificate. You are an owner of that company officially. And so are many other thousands of people, perhaps even millions, invest in stocks and shares. And they're all part owners of the company Apple. Now it's the same thing that goes for Alphabet, usually known as Google, Amazon, Meta, formerly known as Facebook, Tesla, Microsoft. All these companies are public companies. You can buy stocks and shares. You can invest. You can become a part owner. With some investment apps, it actually allows you to buy a fraction of that company. I think currently the Alphabet shares is like $150. There are some apps that allows you to buy just $10 worth or £20 worth of this particular company. Now the company that I'm using is called Free Trade. They make investing simple and easy and straightforward. They also make having an ISA really simple because I pay like £5 a month for the access to an ISA. And the access to that ISA is very, very simple. If I want to invest more than £20,000 in a tax year, I can. So the 20,000 tax-free. Above that 20,000, if you invest an additional 10,000, that 10,000 is officially eligible to be taxed if you are gaining capital. What if you're not gaining capital? What if you didn't make a profit? Well, you don't pay tax regardless. Even if you use a free account to invest in the stocks and shares company, if you lose capital or you didn't gain any capital, then you wouldn't pay tax because you haven't gained money. You haven't gained capital interest, so you wouldn't pay tax. It's the same thing to do with your savings account. You gain interest. There's a difference with having 1,000 in your savings account gaining interest and having 1,000,000 in your account gaining interest. There will be a huge difference in the interest amount, which means that those wealthy individuals who have millions in their bank account gaining interest, they probably are subject to tax because it's seen as capital gains, unless it's an ISA account and they carefully invest into it. So that's it in the most basic and simplest ways, to be honest. But just to keep in mind, this is not financial advice. This is just my opinion on what an ISA is, what apps are there to be used. And there are other apps out there that you can use for investing. Personally, I stick with Free Trade because for now, it's really simple. It's really straightforward. I've had no issues with it. So what are the pros and cons of using an ISA? Well, the biggest pro is that you get to invest up to 20,000 and having all of that capital gains be tax-free. One of the cons is that you're only allowed to have one ISA in a given tax year, which means that at the end of this tax year in April, I could potentially close my ISA account with Free Trade and I could open up a new ISA account for the new tax year starting April the 6th. I can open up a new account with another company or another bank or another trading app. But each tax year, I'm only allowed to have one tax ISA. So that's a really interesting part to remember. Usually that's an interesting part that people sometimes forget, but I'll mention it nevertheless. Now in saying all of this, what the hell would people invest in? Well, some people like to invest short term, some people like to invest long term. Long term has proven to be one of the best ways to invest. Looking at legendary investors like Warren Buffett, Charlie Munger, The list goes on. There's so many that I could name, to be honest. Now, Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger are perhaps the most well-known in this space, in the investment space, and for good reasons, because they invest in companies that are extreme long-term. And here's a fun fact about Warren Buffett. He actually started with the investment strategy of thinking really short-term, using the Benjamin Graham's method of investing. This method was quite simple and it's straightforward, and people still use it till this day. It's to invest in companies that are throwaways. Invest in companies that are doing good at the moment, but you know that they're probably going to mess up in the future. A good example of this right now is perhaps Boeing. Boeing is not doing particularly well, and for good reasons. They've had so many issues with their aircrafts. And what a lot of people are doing right now is probably shorting the Boeing shares, and they're going to probably continue to short shares. Now, shorting shares, it's another story for another time. If you'd like to have a video on shorting stocks and shares, leave a comment and let me know, and I'll make a video on that subject entirely. But companies like Boeing, they're not going to go fully bankrupt. They'll be bought by someone or they will recover. But short term, you can see that company having a slight recovery and then instantly having a crash. It's very predictable in that sense that you could invest in this company, make some money and sell it really quick before the company goes back down. And that's kind of like the philosophy that Warren Buffett was using, is buying companies that are eventually throwaways. And to be honest, Warren Buffett sort of took it to the extreme. He didn't just bought companies that would be throwaway. He bought companies that would completely go bankrupt, companies that would completely go down the drain. But he bought them at the right time to make profit. So he's invested in a lot more worse examples than Boeing. In fact, Boeing is probably too good of an example, but it's the example that I'm going with currently. Or here's another example. Look at Nvidia, doing particularly well. A lot of people, what they're doing right now is investing in Nvidia just to be a part of the herd. Follow the herd as you would. And what a lot of people do is they take their profit and sell, and they just disappear, because they know that right now there's a huge buzz around Nvidia, but this buzz isn't going to last long as AMD and Intel catches up eventually. How long it will take them, we don't know. But a strategy would be to invest in these companies like Nvidia, earn a little bit of profit, 20, 30%, sell, and you're out. And that's where the price goes up to the mountaintop and then it tumbles a little bit. That's what's happening. Investors are taking their cake at the top. And when companies continue to crash constantly, it's because investors have lost faith in that company. Like what happened to Meta a couple years ago. There's the Apple controversy. Meta wasn't allowed to track your iPhone anymore, were they? So investors were selling because they couldn't understand how Meta would be able to compete and to still make ads viable on their platform without being able to track us. It turns out Meta was actually a lot smarter than we ever gave them credit for. If anything, the company is doing better right now than it's ever done. How exactly have they accomplished this? We don't fully know, if I'm being completely honest, but it's really incredible to see. So there's all these companies that are very predictable models that people use to invest in, still do. Cigarette butt companies, Warren Buffett would call them. Now, some investors, they stick with the basic companies, as I've mentioned before. Your Amazon, your Tesla, your Apple, Microsoft, all these predictable companies like Google, Alphabet. So what do investors invest in to have more of a guarantee? Well, investors like to invest in the S&P 500 and other index funds. Index funds are a portfolio of different companies under one umbrella, and you can invest in that. And if the overall portfolio does well, your overall investment does well. The S&P 500 is designed in a very similar way. It's the top 500 companies in the United States. That's the S&P 500. And over time, they haven't failed. Because if the company is doing terrible, it gets removed from the S&P 500. So you don't have to worry. Your money is automatically being reinvested into the next best thing. Which means that companies that are doing bad, they fall out. Companies that are doing well, they enter the S&P 500 and in return, does your portfolio extremely well. This is a really smart way to do well in the market, and the S&P 500 has done continuously well for decades and decades and decades, accumulating, I believe, anywhere from 8 to 9% on an annual basis in terms of capital gains return. Warren Buffett is able to generate anywhere from 18 to 20% on an annual basis for the last 30, 40, 50 years, I believe. It's really incredible. But index funds are a realistic way for people to invest without worrying, because you don't have to worry. If the company in the portfolio is doing terrible, you don't have to remove it. They remove it. The S&P 500 removes it. It falls out. It's no longer eligible to be in the S&P 500 if it's underperforming to a huge margin. For the companies that are overperforming, like Nvidia, they're certainly in the S&P 500. In fact, they're one of the biggest ones in the S&P 500 right now. And the S&P 500 isn't the only index fund. There's multiple other index funds, AI index funds. There's now Bitcoin index funds. If you want me to make a video on those Bitcoin index funds, let me know. That might be a really good video because these Bitcoin investment funds, they are doing incredibly well. As you can see, Bitcoin is also doing incredibly well right now. So there's a lot of things that goes into this space of finance, but I hope this video was helpful to explain the basics around investments. And like I said, it's not financial advice, but the sort of apps that I use. What is an ISA? For people who do live in the UK and they're not fully aware of how to utilize their ISA account. This was just a quick explainer on that, just a quick explainer. So I hope it's made sense. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to see more. Leave a like, leave a comment, and I'll see you in our next video. Peace.